Vikir began to envision a sword. He knew better than anyone that Baskerville-style swordsmanship wasn't simply about cutting or stabbing. It tears flesh and breaks bones, like biting fangs. The knight's attack had been so fierce that it had almost completely severed Vikir's shoulder. Our boy placed his hand on his shoulder and couldn't help but scream in agony. Despite being wounded, Vikir started to stare intently at the knight, his eyes beginning to shine with determination. He wasn't going to give up so easily. He understood now why the wounds took on such grotesque shapes. He found it hard to believe that the knight had only used the 8th technique. There was barely a 1-level difference. And yet the wound was so severe that not even the power of the basilisk he had obtained outside the tower allowed him to heal quickly. Our boy carried the Beelzebub sword, and in its first slot, he had the S-rank Madame's poisonous legs. The second held the S-rank Immortal Basilisk, and in the third, the A+ rank Mushisu of Silent Hill. The knight's attention fixed on Vikir. He began to observe our boy in silence. As smoke emerged from his wound, Vikir started to stare intently at the knight and couldn't help but grit his teeth, feeling furious. To him, an opponent of this level was impressive. The knight unsheathed his sword, looked away, and a strange energy began to emerge from his body. Even with his hand on the wound, Vikir watched in silence, not fully understanding how he was so powerful. The knight turned around, and his eyes began to glow with malice. He came from an era of chaos, where each family ruled like an independent kingdom. In that time, there was a man, the strongest among the 7 counts who led House Baskerville to its golden age. A man who, after seeking only power, withdrew from the world and disappeared. His name was Cane Corso Le Baskerville. Vikir stood up and, while panting heavily, asked if he was Cane Corso Le Baskerville. The wind began to blow, and the knight nodded his head. Cane Corso's eyes filled with curiosity. He wanted to know who Vikir was. As our boy's wound was slowly healing, with a furious expression, he introduced himself as Vikir van Baskerville. Cane Corso couldn't help but feel somewhat surprised, recognizing that a son of the Van, and not the L, had reached the supreme level before coming of age. Vikir started to gaze toward the ground, gritted his teeth hard, and remained silent. Cane Corso also noticed that Vikir carried the Beelzebub sword, a weapon believed to be lost. Furthermore, he noted his incredible regeneration ability, which allowed him to recover even after taking the 8th technique. He acknowledged that he was an incredible guy. Vikir's eyes widened with seriousness. To him, the incredible one was Cane Corso. He admitted that, at first, he hadn't even been able to understand the true nature of the Baskerville's 8th technique. Cane Corso began to walk toward our boy, his body starting to emit an intense yet powerful aura. Vikir realized that, with his senses, he hadn't even been able to perceive his life force. But the instant he revealed his true identity, the aura he emitted felt like it was tearing his skin to pieces. Vikir began to remember Cane Corso using the 8th technique, a technique so powerful that not even our boy could resist it. The only thing certain was that, at that moment, he had no chance of winning. With his hand on the wound and a calm gaze, Vikir began to observe Cane attentively. He realized that he was the creator of the lurking ambusher technique and wondered just how high his true level reached. Cane gripped his sword by the hilt with both hands and decided to reveal his true level. Cane concentrated and slammed his sword into the ground with force, shattering the ground to pieces. Then he began to remove the bandages he had on his face. He started to gaze toward the ground and revealed that he had accepted a set of complex emotions to achieve the 7th technique. Vikir's eyes widened in surprise and fear, leaving him in shock. He couldn't believe what his eyes were seeing. Several seconds later, Cane removed all the bandages from his face and threw them to the ground, creating tension. Cane's face was half burned and his skull was visible. With his eyes shining with determination, he revealed that through the battle with the basilisk, on the verge of death and with an extreme desire to survive, he had grasped the 8th technique. And finally, right at the edge of death upon entering the tower, he crossed the final threshold. He had reached the end of level 9, Swordmaster, and, enveloped in death itself, he had become the Death Knight. Cane was a Death Knight, also known as the Knight of Death. He was the product of a noble knight consumed by the abyss, someone who in life had possessed pure strength and spirit. This being drew mana infinitely from the shadow dimension beyond death, a power that would not cease until its body crumbled and its soul faded completely. His risk level, size, and origin were unknown. Vikir swallowed hard, and his eyes widened in confusion. He began to feel a terror he had never felt before. He couldn't believe this was the 9th form, the true highest level of a swordmaster. Cane began to observe our boy in silence without saying a single word. He was a being who had accepted death itself in pursuit of mastery. Kane started to gaze toward the ground and, with a calm voice, revealed that the lurking ambusher was not his creation. Kane began to recall what he had read in a book. He extended his hand and admitted that he had not reached the 10th form. To reach that level, one had to die once and be resurrected. And although he had certainly died, he was not someone who had come back to life. As a strange energy emerged from Kane's skull, he began to imagine the strange tree and, with a sincere gaze, he revealed that as a Death Knight, he could not be resurrected. And for this reason, he had been trapped in this place. Vikir's eyes widened with confusion and curiosity. He questioned how someone of Kane's level could be trapped, wondering what exactly this place was and who had imprisoned him. As the torches illuminated the place, Kane began to ponder. He acknowledged that Vikir knew nothing, but this was understandable, as there was no one who knew of this place. Our boy became even more curious. As Kane's eyes shone with sadness, he revealed that this place was the Tomb of the Stabbed Blade, a site where the life and death of the first Baskerville were intertwined. Vikir, who was panting to catch his breath, listened in silence without interrupting. Kane revealed that the cradle where the first Baskerville was born was called the Cradle of the Stabbed Blade, and this was the place where he met his death. It was a site where the worthy, as if by fate, reached the truth of the sword. Only a true Baskerville could die in this tomb, and the fact that Vikir had found this place was proof that destiny had guided him. Vikir's mind flooded with questions and confusion. With a serious gaze, he asked what Kane was talking about. Kane began to imagine himself sitting on the throne, chained. It was the tower that had imprisoned him, binding him so he could never leave. Someone slowly began to open the door to the place, letting in the sunlight. The person who had opened the door was none other than Vikir. The Grave of Blades had assigned Kane the role of its guardian, the one tasked with welcoming the true Baskerville. As its protector, he was destined to guide him toward the 10th style. Over time, Kane had come to understand that someone who carried the true destiny of a Baskerville would find him one day. This person was the only one who could free him, a being who could not even die, from this eternity of suffering. Vikir's wound had already healed completely. With a serene expression, he questioned if he was that fated one. Kane's eyes, whose hands were resting on the pommel of his sword, began to shine with tranquility. He knew that Vikir could reach the end of the Baskerville 10 forms, but to achieve it, he would have to face him and experience death. Kane pulled out his sword, which was stuck in the ground, and the blade began to glow. He made it clear that until their duel concluded, Vikir would not take a single step out of this place. He would kill Vikir, and Vikir, in turn, had to reach the 10th form to kill him. With a gaze full of determination and confidence, he affirmed that Vikir must free him, for this was the destiny decreed by the tower. Instead of feeling fear, Vikir's eyes began to shine with confidence. Showing the blade of his sword, he told Kane not to talk nonsense. Destiny was a boring concept to him. He only believed in his own decisions. A powerful aura began to emerge from Vikir's body. Our boy adopted an offensive stance and decided to attack with everything he had, making it clear that he would kill him and leave this place. Kane simply stood in silence, ready to continue the duel. Vikir gritted his teeth hard, and in the blink of an eye, he appeared in front of Kane. The Death Knight's eyes widened in surprise and confusion. He couldn't believe Vikir's skill had increased so much. With a furious expression, Kane prepared to counterattack, questioning if Vikir was mocking destiny. Just before our boy could take another breath, Kane attacked swiftly, striking our boy under the jaw. Vikir gritted his teeth and his eyes began to burn with rage. He couldn't believe Kane had counterattacked with his bare hands. The Death Knight didn't waste another second. He grabbed his sword and prepared to attack again. Kane swung the sword forcefully, questioning if Vikir believed he could escape his destiny. Luckily, Vikir reacted in time and was able to block the attack, but in the process, his body was sent flying backward. Vikir staggered back, and as he caught his breath, his attention fixed on Kane. He felt somewhat confused, noticing that not even a surprise attack had worked. Kane asked if he thought he could catch his breath in the middle of a life or death fight. Hearing this, Vikir snapped out of his thoughts, his eyes filling with surprise. Kane moved like a thunderclap, and by the time Vikir noticed, the Death Knight was only inches away, ready to strike again. Kane swung his sword with precision, but luckily, Vikir was quick. Using his Beelzebub sword, he managed to block the attack. Our boy gritted his teeth hard and, with a surprised expression, realized that Kane was incredibly fast and that the difference in their levels was overwhelming. Our boy decided not to give up. For this very reason, he would break the gap with his ultimate technique, the technique he trusted most in his 2 lives, before and after his return. As Vikir's eyes shone with determination, he decided it was time to use the 4th Baskerville technique. Noticing this, Kane gripped his sword tightly and decided to use the 5th Baskerville technique, and a powerful energy began to emerge from his blade. Just before Vikir could take another breath, Kane attacked with a powerful and devastating slash, making it clear that Vikir couldn't escape this destiny either. The difference in power was so enormous that Vikir took the full brunt of the attack. He opened his mouth and began to scream in agony, but far from giving up, Vikir gritted his teeth and his eyes began to shine. In the blink of an eye, Vikir lunged at Kane and imbued all his mana into his sword. With a piercing gaze, he decided it was time to use the 6th Baskerville technique. Kane watched our boy in silence. Far from dodging the attack, Kane began to charge toward Vikir, and decided to counterattack using the 7th Baskerville technique. The result was devastating. Just before Vikir could even attack, Kane's sword pierced his chest like an arrow of mana. Vikir's body was sent flying with great force and crashed against the statue of one of the swords. Blood began to gush from his wounds, and Vikir started to cough, realizing that nothing was working. Kane was dodging all of his attacks. Kane raised his sword, lunged at our boy, and began to imbue all his mana into the blade, summoning a mana so powerful that Vikir had never seen before. Kane was a monster. Kane's eyes began to glow with rage. He told our boy to try and stop the attack with his sword. Hearing this, Vikir gritted his teeth, knowing he couldn't give up. With his body covered in cuts and deep wounds, Vikir began to charge toward Kane and use the 7th Baskerville technique. But as always, Kane used a more advanced technique than Vikir. The Death Knight unleashed the 9th technique. An intense mana began to emerge from his sword, which expanded throughout the entire place. Kane swung his sword with precision. As the slash slowly approached, Vikir panicked, knowing this wasn't good. The slash hit Vikir head-on, making his eyes widen in fear. Kane's mana made Vikir experience a pain he had never felt before. Its mana began to course through his entire body, destroying every part. Our boy opened his mouth and, not long after, as the sunlight illuminated the place, he fell to his knees. Kane watched in silence. Vikir's body was covered in cuts, and despite being a strong warrior, he was no match for Kane. Not long after, Vikir fell defeated to the ground. Kane's attention fixed on him, and his mind filled with questions and disappointment. Vikir had a deep gash on his shoulder and back, and the ground was covered in blood. Vikir felt as if he were in a river of blood. Several minutes later, our boy slowly began to open his eyes. Vikir's body was floating in blood, and in front of him was a door. He didn't know what this place was. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video.